Excellent.
All right, so you should be host, so you can start it whenever you're ready.
All right, start should be good.
Yep, we already have someone in.
Excellent. I am going to go ahead and pop open the Q&A. And if I happen to miss a question, of course, don't hesitate, call it out. I appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely can do.
All right, and as people join in, make sure you're taking the poll. I don't know where the standings are currently, but if we get Arcos to win, that's going to be great. Just saying. Although I've seen a lot of support in the chat this morning for Rubes, so great. If the Rubes win, that's fine. And give a few more minutes for everybody to join in. Hope everybody's having a fantastic Reaper Expo. Having 2 Reaper events in a year is very exciting for me anyhow. I really, really am stoked. It'll be interesting to see too some of the people who are experiencing Reaper, the Expo, as their first exposure. So I'm really excited to see some of the comments and input that people have. Hello, Joshua. And a few minutes out. I don't know who's taken what courses so far for the Expo, but if you weren't able to get a course that you wanted, I know that for ReaperCon, a lot of the artists will be back doing similar or same courses. So I hope you reach out to them. They're all super welcoming of questions and comments. And make sure you let them know that you're looking forward to seeing them at ReaperCon in September so that they already start thinking about it and blocking in those time frames. I know I do that unapologetically. And for the panels, I know they work a little bit different than the courses, but I definitely welcome questions and comments and feedback and input. It should be super interactive, I always hope, and really drive good conversation. So as you're joining, or if you're currently joined, don't hesitate if you have questions, either pop it in the Q&A or just ask it out. Great. Welcome, of course, and I hope you've enjoyed the community and the experience. Bear with me 1 second. There we go. Yeah, for if this is your first Reaper experience, I can only tell you they get better and better once everything goes back to live as well. The live ReaperCons are fantastic. ReaperCon is so amazing. I'm actually kind of hoping, for me, ReaperCon in the past has had some challenges in being able to block the time out and go. In my previous line of work, I always had a different expo that was work related that always seemed to coincide with ReaperCon. So I was never able to make it for a full ReaperCon. So being able to mend or mesh both virtual as well as in person, I think is going to be fantastic. I think having to do it for the COVID is really going to change the way that ReaperCon going forward is conducted. So I'm super excited and super stoked for the people who aren't able to attend in person, having some way to attend still virtually. So super exciting. But we're just about at 1 o'clock. We'll give another couple minutes as people start trickling through, but definitely welcome. Yes, from ReaperCon to Reaper Expo, definitely. For those of you who don't know me in the Discord, I always just go by Joe. I'm not super creative in that front aspect. If you participate in the Reaper forums, which I highly recommend, in the Reaper forums, I go by Cerebro1974, so Cerebro 1974. I try to do a lot of paint exchanges, mini exchanges in the forums, as well as put out just as much information as I can about helping with the miniature community. See, I love ReaperCon in person, but that's just me. So if you're ever in the forums, don't hesitate, drop a bug and say hello. Add me as one of your friends and contacts. I love to talk about everything from paint theories, new releases, bones, everything in between. So miniatures is a big part of my passion. And that all stemmed from tabletop gaming, which is why for this panel, it's about miniatures and game aids for tabletop use. In my past, as I was growing up, I was a lover of tabletop role-playing games and started doing a little bit of miniature use to represent my characters. As I moved into a DM role and GM, I guess more specifically, for different tabletop role-playing systems, but I'll use DM because Dungeons and Dragons is just such a behemoth in the role-playing game world. But oh yeah, Grenadier, absolutely. Old school, all that lead. But as I moved into a DM role, I found more and more need to have representation of different creatures and terrains and NPCs to use on the table. The reason for me that that's very important and impactful is because as humans, we're very visual people. Think about any type of medium and visually how we identify with the world around us is probably the most impactful way. It's the first thing that impacts us generally. Sometimes smells will get you first or a sound, but visual characters, yes, create memorable experiences. And by utilizing miniatures initially to represent my character, I was able to take that miniature and think about how does that character think and act? What's important to them? What are they out to do and achieve? And the more time I spent painting on a miniature to represent my character and thinking about my character, the better I was able to role play my character. And just role playing a character with more dimension and more nuance is very enlightening for you as a player, but it also gives a lot of opportunity for your GM to help you on that path. Paper and pencil for Kathleen, that's how I started. And so that evolves, I guarantee it. And as you evolve with it, you'll find that by incorporating tabletop game aids more and more, especially for people who are new to tabletop gaming, who have only started to experience it virtually due to COVID, as things grow and change and progress, I have a feeling we'll get more and more back into gathering around the tabletop with so many new players. And again, for me, it starts with just that miniature piece, starting as a character. And as a GM, I do the same thing with anytime I'm painting any of the villains or NPCs, anytime I'm doing any type of a foe. It doesn't matter if it's some type of a beast or some type of a giant. As I'm painting, I'm thinking about that character. I'm thinking about their driving forces, and it may be a mini that I'll use for different encounters in different ways, but it gets me thinking creatively on how I can give some depth to that character that I'm painting. As we gather up around the tabletop, and bear with me, a little quick message from my brother. He was unable to join us via camera, so I apologize, but he is in the chat as well. So he can definitely chime in on the chat, and if he has anything that he wants me to say on camera, he'll message me. But as I go through and build up the aspects of the miniatures that I'm painting, utilizing them for any type of the story elements that I'm working on, I think about the different game aids that we incorporate into tabletop games. And old school, we start with paper maps and counters and all things like that. As we start adding things like miniatures and terrain, how those miniatures are going to be interacting in the game world, we're adding more and more depth to our tabletop game. Having some of the game systems be very reliant on mechanics, the miniature and other game aid uses are very important for tactical situations, whether you're using a piece of blank paper, a battle mat, actual built terrain. Being able to have the players interact on a level of their miniature, moving around those mats and game aids that you've placed out on the table, whether that's on an actual table or that you've added into your virtual tabletop, does three things really well for engagement. The first thing is it drives more immersive experiences for you as a GM or as a player. When you're looking through the lens of your, whether it's a miniature or a counter or a token at the game environment, it draws you in and makes you actually feel a part of that world. So for immersion alone, it's fantastic to start bringing people into your game world that you're setting up. The second thing it does is it really allows players and GMs to be more reactive in their play style. If whether you've drawn it on a battle mat, you've got it on a virtual tabletop, the environment that you're moving your miniatures and counters to, you're going to react based on the visual aspects of what your counter, your representation is going through and experiencing. Now, there's always going to be some type of metagamers that can see the whole picture and enact that. Yes, so especially in online play. But being able to first draw them in and have them immersive, you can always backpedal some of that metagaming with simple statements like, you may know that, but your character doesn't, or things like that. But it allows them to start thinking more strategically and interactively with the environment that you've built around, rather than them just sitting around a screen or around a table with a lot of buddies. It's going to make their play style change dynamically. And then the third thing that it's going to do is when people are using, whether it's miniatures that they've painted themselves, miniatures that you've painted for them, miniatures that are representative of the party or NPCs, it starts to add more respect for their gameplay. Now, what I mean by that is when a general player thinks about the work that a GM or DM puts into play, they may think it takes some time, it takes some prep work and everything. But when they start looking at things like miniatures that you've hand painted, and they'll start talking about it, and you can give them details about how you painted it, how long it took, different things you used, it starts to click on a different level that there's real effort, time, attention, passion put into these game aids that they're presenting for players to move around and to just play with. They start to respect the level of time, attention, and detail that goes into what you're presenting as your environment, your game world, your story. When they start having more respect, they're going to start having better attendance. They're going to have better participation. And on average, you're going to see that when it's time to start playing, they're more invested in that time commitment. Again, these are all in my experience and my opinions. Your mileage may vary because there are some who don't have that same type of passion that you do. But from what I've seen and from my experience, the majority of it started just from painting a miniature, people seeing it, getting excited about it, asking questions, and having open discussions about that leading into other aspects of tabletop gaming. So when I'm presenting a map, when I'm working on a terrain piece, when I'm setting up a story hook and utilizing whether it's miniatures, whether it's counters, the aspect of my players to be able to get more immersed and really kind of get in the mindset for how their character is interacting with those visual pieces that we're setting up. It really is more rewarding for me in that I get better opportunity for my players to take an active role in the storytelling and process of the tabletop game than when I just am doing theater of mind. Let's see, here's from Joseph. Oh yeah, especially when you're working on scaled pieces that are interactive, those kinds of things are very impactful to the players. And again, as we look at tabletop games, one of the challenges is separating player from character or having your player play the character and not the player. Having representation of what their character is so impactful in just some of their behaviors. I'm sure everybody's seen the meme that shows the massive lion, all armored, strutting out into a field. It says my player one's backstory. And then it shows a small kitten passing the doorway and my player one's stats. Very similar. By finding miniatures, which regardless of the system you're playing, Reaper will have one for you, that just represents an aspect of the character, whether you're playing a sci-fi piece and using a chronoscope, whether you're using a Dark Haven, whether you're using even just any type of game system that you're playing, you'll be able to find something that's representative of the character. Yes, positions, very important. When they start seeing those representations of the character, it's very easy for you to kind of dial players back and keep them more in line with their character's stats, not the player's knowledge or stats. So super interactive that way. Now, additionally, some of the, oh yes, very, very much. So some of the things that I've found with miniatures and game aids for tabletops too is incorporation of both. So I don't have a great example just because it's large, but terrain pieces that I use on the tabletop, I've actually used Reaper minis And they've got a couple that are dedicated as statues, but some of the minis that they have themselves are fantastic to incorporate into things like terrain as statues and fountains. There are so many opportunities if you're more interested in creating dynamic terrain, dioramas, display pieces that you can utilize in your game, especially if you're looking at things that are unique and different. If you're running a published campaign, but you're making some changes, what better way to make those changes to be able to keep any type of metagamer from breaking the game than by having things that are different from the game? So finding ways to incorporate miniatures and miniature pieces into terrain that you're presenting, whether it's on a virtual tabletop or around a table, to the players is fantastic. Additionally, as you're going through with your tabletop games, working on miniatures and setting them up. I know the camera is not great for showing the miniatures that I'm holding up. If you have questions, just let me know. But as you're building the miniatures specifically for use in tabletop games, making sure they're durable, they've got good coats of sealants on them, their bases are well put together and not overly decorative, but decorative enough to still fire up some passion. As you're creating those miniature masterpieces that you're going to be presenting to your players, don't hesitate to really tie in aspects of your players into the miniatures. Just like we would if we're making a box for them to store their mini in or their dice. Personalization into a mini for the player is a huge way for them to connect to your hobby, maybe even share your hobby. If you have a fantastically painted mini and they want to know how you did it, and you're able to tell them to check out Reaper, it's a great way to grow the hobby. But having that bit of personalization, again, goes to allowing them to have a more interactive experience as a player, where it's playing with emotions and feelings to the tabletop game, which is quick and easy to just view as escape piece, rather than just have it something that they can turn on and off like an Xbox or PlayStation. When you're emotionally involved with your character and with a game, you're going to take the game a lot more seriously or fun if you're playing a holy grail type of campaign. But you're going to put the effort in that you're actually getting out emotionally. So for me, gaming that starts with miniatures ends with players who are more apt to do a cooperative storytelling experience than just someone who wants to kill a couple hours slaying some bad guys. While those can be fun, many people that I know of like to be more creative and create a more expansive world and storylines and story arcs. So by utilizing the tools that you have, you're able to achieve some of your goals, get the buy-in and support, and then really get kind of good kudos and accolades by seeing other people enjoy those creative pieces. Again, for me, it all started with needing a couple of minis for characters that I wanted to represent, because I would doodle them out and sketch them out, think about them, but having a miniature to represent my character was very impactful to me. It made it more enjoyable to see my character in a 3-dimension sculpt. Now I use minis for everything that I possibly can. And because I wanted to do better and better, I've done a lot of studying, learning, asking questions, and participating more and more in the miniature hobby. So sculpting, painting, and the contacts, acquaintances, friends, and community is like no other community out there. Many of the tabletop communities always have that element of negativity that each of us faces at one time or another. I can honestly say, finding minis that represent all different aspects, it's super important. With the community of the 80s are very, very hard. With the community at especially Reaper driven, I would say more so than any other miniature company out there. The community is all about cooperation, helping grow, sharing knowledge. There's no one that's so passionate out there to share what they've learned over years as Reaper fans. It's just a fantastic way to build yourself up with a retinue of skills and opportunity to talk to people who are interested in the same things you are, grow a community of support around yourself, utilize what you learn and discuss and experience into the games that you play with your friends and family, or even strangers if you're doing onlines or charity gaming or convention gaming. And again, when it starts and ends with thinking about how we can better impact the tabletop from the community that just is all about miniatures, expand that across the game aids that we use and how we interact with those game aids as players, as GMs, as a community, there is a huge opportunity for us to make the gaming world continue to grow in a positive light while we're also growing and developing ourselves with skills that we can pass on to the next generations who are also interested in how did you paint that mini. Let's see how we are on time. Oh, we're great on time. Let's see, I've seen a few questions pop up, but I don't see any in the Q&A itself. Any big questions before I keep going? I don't see any popping up. Let's see. So I'm going to go through just a couple here and scroll back a little bit. So Joseph, just for the weekend, I can tell you there's so much learning that goes on. I hope you're able to get through a lot of the courses and classes and panels that you wanted to. If not, again, don't panic. ReaperCon coming in September is going to have a lot of the same, and then you'll be able to build up from some of the beginners and intermediates to advance. Let's see, for Kathleen, a bookstore in Claymont, Delaware that I used to frequent, all the second edition. Now, isn't it funny how the local bookstores where we used to buy just the manuals that we use, that whole aspect of our gaming culture has had to change. Now, many of us have to game in gaming stores or visit gaming stores. It's a great way that the community is still kind of stuck together and grown and diversified. Let's see, minis at the PX or AAF, yes. So I have not checked out to see what the PX is like for gaming materials. I've had a friend who said that it varies from base to base. So if you have information on that, that's something that I would say if you have an opportunity to put it in a discussion on social media, definitely plug that in. And no worries if it was a long time ago, just if you have recent, sharing knowledge is always a key on how we can help grow. So I'll say here, I do see the comment on Hero Forge. I will say I don't have a lot of experience on Hero Forge. I have a couple of players who have purchased minis on Hero Forge, but I myself have not. I can say for me, what I've done in the past, I've been very blessed to be able to utilize some of the Reaper tools in Kickstarters specifically. So I have a wide assortment of minis. Some of them you have no idea when you're going to use them and when you're not. But ultimately, anytime I have a mini that say I don't know if I'm ever going to use, here is a flesh golem, for instance. I don't regularly use flesh golems, but I can tell you as I was painting it, an encounter started building up in my mind on one of the campaigns that I currently run. And as I started thinking more about it, how I started painting the golem, thinking about how he could be interactive with the environment that the campaign was going on, where I could place him, what could be his reason for being there. Just by picking up a random golem and starting to paint it, really started getting my creative juices going. And I actually built in a story arc, like a side story arc, that that group, that campaign that is running right now is currently going through. This is a direction I had no intention of the game going. But by utilizing just a mini that I didn't know how, why, or if I should even paint it, because I didn't have an expectation to use it, really drove a storyline that now 6 people are experiencing just because I'm trying to get all of my minis painted before Bones 5 hit. And there again, it's something where I look for ways to challenge myself in new ways, both painting minis, but also utilizing minis and driving some of my other creative processes. So that's a great example of that. If you have any examples too, anybody, don't hesitate to let them know or pop it in there. I would love to hear some of your feedback. Additionally, this is a dwarf. Again, I know the camera is not great. My lighting for up close to the camera is not great, but this is a dwarf. I love the sculpt, and I can tell you that I have purchased this mini 5 times because I love the sculpt so much. This mini has represented 2 player characters and several NPCs. This is a mini that, because I love the sculpt, most of the campaigns that I run, I try to incorporate this mini as an NPC to have for familiarity for me. While the NPC has always had little bits of changes and differences, there is a big kind of personality shift from game to game, because the more time I spend with him as an NPC, the more I think of different aspects of maybe his cousin or anything like that. By utilizing that one mini, the creativity that it's driven me to do really allows me to change up the game and offer my players different experiences, even if they're moving from one campaign to another. They may encounter that same mini, but the personality behind that mini could be completely different because I've recently had a new painting of it and started thinking about the character in a different way. The same way as with that, if you do tie-ins with other tabletop games, so for that mini specifically, his carry box has the symbol of Moradin, where initially when I painted him, he was just a fighter, just a dwarf fighter with an axe. Starting to think about how I could utilize that in a bigger environment, had a bigger impact on my game world. And now he's a follower of Moradin and not a cleric, but he definitely is a worshiper of Moradin and really pushes for Moradin to be a bigger part of that game's world. For me, the creativity from my workbench, from my painting workbench to my tabletop environment really has grown almost in parallels. David, hello and welcome. Shelton, a long time DM, great to have you. So as my journey of painting and GMing has continued to evolve and grow, I find the more complexities that I learn in the community of mini painting, new techniques, new paint and color theories, and new materials, looking at Bones and Bones USA. I also find that my gaming style and expectations for myself have grown and evolved as well. I love complex minis that are dynamic with flowing capes and flowing hair and moving things. They really represent characters in action. When I'm painting minis for players or dynamic NPCs, I look for those types of sculpts. But I also really like just very bare basic bones for throwaways. Bones, if I'm painting goblins and I need just a huge number of goblins or kobolds, the opportunity to utilize things like bones, then let's see, here's one from Joshua just covering this subject too. Use a mini over and over again in a group of mooks where the other minis change. Players will start to wonder why that one guy. Oh yeah, and which that goes right back into it. As you're using those goblins or kobolds repeatedly, and you have the one standout who is more dynamic, it starts getting them thinking, is that the same guy? Is that different? You can also use that to differentiate. Well, he's the boss. For me, again, as both of my paths of miniature hobbying and tabletop have developed in deeper and deeper ways over time, I find again that now where I'm at in my stages, I'm still like a sponge. I want more information. I want more learning. I want to be better and apply things that I can learn from those who are better than me. But I'm also at a point where I'm happy to start giving information away. I'm comfortable with myself and with what I've acquired, that I'm not going to lead people astray, whether it's choosing minis, choosing mini paints, and talking about painting techniques and color theory, or into the tabletop as well by talking about scenarios, plot hooks, NPCs, how to utilize terrain to make combats more dynamic, how to challenge players with different skill sets, whether using different multi-pronged approaches or one big bad evil bad guy. The confidence that it's built for both the painting and miniature hobby, as well as my tabletop, has continued to grow and change and be dynamic. And I really feel that I'm at a place now where, even though I'm still learning all the time, I'm able to help others who are newer to the fields with confidence. By doing that, we're taking on some of the roles that just a few years ago, in my opinion, people like Ian and Aaron were in, where they were still on that learning curve. And you see, by taking some of their panels and classes, the skill level they've achieved and how they're so ready to start passing that knowledge on and helping us all grow and develop. Remember, those pros started out as novices as well, and just through their own perseverance, questioning, learning, willingness to take critiques, look relatively in the mirror, and find opportunities to grow and develop, they've become the masters that they are, that I still love to just listen to and watch. Let's see, any other big questions that we have? We're doing really, really good on time. As we cover from miniatures and tabletop game aids, are there any problems that any of you have had integrating miniatures, or maybe it's terrain bits or other handouts, any other game aids into your tabletops? I know virtual has definitely had a challenging impact for many of us. I will say one secret that I found, if you have your miniature, you can take photos of it, which you should, to post, both to show off your work, but also to get good critiques back. You can utilize those photos of your miniatures in your games as tokens on virtual tabletops. It's a fantastic way to continue using your miniatures in your games, even though you're virtual. Also with your terrain, if you're building terrain, take photos and upload it as maps. You can put grids on top of it. Most of the time they're going to have grids built in anyhow. A great way to marry the two. But any challenges anybody that's watching has had with or questions on integrating your miniatures? Kathleen, yeah, absolutely. I found that's super, super beneficial, especially for me. I paint miniatures for the players of my campaign. Now, due to COVID, the last 2 campaigns I've started, I have not been able to hand them their minis around the table. So by utilizing photos of their minis, and of course I show them photos of their minis, but I integrate those as their tokens, and it's worked really, really well. I had a class talking about the basing. I know there's a lot of concern about paint rub off and just general wear on your minis using around a tabletop. Again, because I started as a tabletop gamer, about 90% of the minis I paint specifically for tabletop use. The other 10% I'll use for dioramas, contests, and other competitions. But 90% of what I paint, I'm painting specifically for a tabletop. I also am quite a perfectionist, so I don't want just a quick down and dirty coat that does not have any detail. I paint the majority of my minis like I would a display miniature. Spend about the same amount of time, even if it's just a bugbear, because I love the process. But because I'm putting that time and effort in it, protection is super important for that mini. After I paint it, I make sure I seal it really, really well. That's one of the best secrets for using your miniatures that you spent time painting. Seal it and then continue to seal it. As you touch and move the mini around, or others touch and move the mini around, you're going to wear that. All you have to do is just reseal it, give it a quick brushing. And I have a specific brush that I use just to make sure I dust them off and make sure that they're nice and clean, so I can reseal it and I'm good to go. For the bases, I don't put a lot of heavy elements on it. If it's not a display piece, I still want it to be decorative. So I'll put bits of flock, some mosses or static grass on there, but I don't overdo it like I do with one of my competition or display minis. Put enough elements there to elevate it to that next level, but by not putting on too much, anytime you go to reseal it, you don't have to worry about those elements being attached to the mini. And if you add flock or static grass, you can use just a mixture of PVA white glue with water, 50-50, just like when you're putting the elements on there. Give it a quick little dab to make sure everything stays in place, let it dry thoroughly. And then when you go to seal, you're not going to have anything blow up onto the miniature from the sealant. So continuing to keep them looking good, but durable for the tabletop is an important key on bringing those elements in. And then you're not having, though I sometimes do, more out of need than anything else, unpainted minis on your tabletop. Which again, I'm guilty of. I have some minis that I have not yet painted. I'm working on it. It's something we all can work on. I utilize these when I need to because it's the right miniature for the right environment or encounter that I'm doing. There are times I'll have to get things that are unpainted, slap down on the table and use it. With those there, as I use it, I'm definitely marking in my mind, when am I going to paint it? Make sure I think about it. And then because I fingered it, I'm going to treat it just like any other miniature. I'm going to give it a good cleaning. I'm going to make sure that all the mold lines are removed. Then I'm going to paint it just like I would normally. But there are times. Let's see, here's a quick question. What do you do about minis where there's a disconnect between their base size and their in-game stats? Ooh, that's a great question. I can tell you there are a couple of different ways to do it. So this, for instance, is a stone golem. In Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, this is a large creature. Now, when you put this stone golem, and I'm going to use a couple of minis, next to the flesh golem, the flesh golem is actually a little bit bigger in size. Now, flesh golem stats are medium, so I put him on a medium base. He's massive. He overdoes it, but it's the base for the map, the battle map, that's the most important. So the flesh golem, even though he's a bit bigger in size, he goes on a medium base. The stone golem went on a large base. Now you can see he does not take up much space on that base at all. But again, for the game mechanics for this, it's more important to have the right base size. So I do that. A different example is with a dragon, right? These are some pretty massive sized sculpts, and they go on an average 3-inch base. In my aspect, I use the base that I need, and anything that overlaps, it's okay, because that base, as your player characters are moving around the base on that battle map, that's the most important aspect. And you can actually utilize that to your advantage in some cases. With a dragon, for instance, if they make a hit and they hit the wing, that's great. It's not a heart, it's not a throat. You're able to utilize some of that for flair. Let's see, our table is a bit small, so I like to go up whenever we can. So I have terrain that goes vertical. Also, I made a bunch of flying bases. By level 8, you will have flying characters. Yes, very true. Excuse me. So vertical is also another way you can do. So for me, I also use a lot of battle mats. And there are a lot of times where I've got multiple battle mats and I've got them stacked and prepped and ready to go so that I can show different layers and everything. Or I can reverse it and continue it on. I have them connected, almost like older modules where you have the front and back cover be different maps. And just thinking of that in a different scale. But great question, Joshua. I hope that helped answer. As you're prepping up your minis, if you're looking at utilizing them on the tabletop, or your players have minis that they have prepped up for the tabletop, additional game aids to continue tying those in are a fantastic way to build on that experience. If you have a player who has his mini and through the course of the game, they have now got plate armor where before they're represented in cloaks and things like that. Don't be afraid to look at opportunities to upgrade miniatures. That former miniature can then go on to a display shelf. It's going to bring some memories. It's going to bring some good, fun, emotional pieces every time the player sees it. But don't be afraid to replace minis as time goes on as well. Well, if you do good prep work and maintain the durability of your minis, they're going to last a long time on the table. There's never anything wrong with updating minis as well to reflect how that character or villain or monster has updated in the game. So don't think that anytime you have a character that they're locked in forever. That could be just their level 1 character. Let's see, any other big questions out of there? How are we on time? Oh yeah, we still got about 15 minutes. No big questions out there. Paul, definitely thank you for helping in the comments. I apologize, everything didn't work out for sign up for the video, but if people do have questions too, if you leave it on my channel, I'll make sure those get to Paul as well. So one final push that I want to do for miniatures and how they relate to tabletop is going over some of the opportunities that we as tabletop gamers who are miniature painting enthusiasts have. And that's working with the Reaper forums. If you're not in the forums, I highly recommend joining. Oftentimes we do miniature exchanges. And if there's miniatures that you need, or you have extras and you want to paint and get rid of and swap for something that you need, miniature exchanges are fantastic. They come in crazy important in a pinch. I needed to have a were-rat, and I didn't have any miniatures. I could have easily ordered it and gotten it really quickly from Reaper. However, at the time, I had a lot of goblins. And so rather than just get another miniature that I had to paint, I thought I would balance it out a little bit. And so I did an exchange on the forums for another painter who I've done a couple of exchanges with. I just put it out there. I need a were-rat. Does anybody have an extra that you can paint? I've got goblins. We did an exchange. I painted a couple of goblins. I got a painted were-rat ready to go, placed on the table. I gave the exact needs that I wanted, sealed really well, very little basing. I'm going to be using it on the tabletop. And it was a great way for me to clean off some of the minis that I had on the shelf. And James, thank you. Get to it, enjoy. And I was able to help someone else out who needed goblins and didn't have enough. Let's see, here's one of Paul's questions. How does everyone feel about improvising different uses for game aids? You may have spent hours creating when the players take an unforeseen direction and you don't really want to railroad them. Yeah, that's a great question. I can say I've been kind of guilty on that, where I'll spend a long time working on a piece of lore that ultimately could lead players in a great direction for the story and getting through the campaign. Rather than go to the tombs, the buried tombs, and finding this bit of lore, they want to go do monster hunting. So they never got the information. So I couldn't say how long I spent on it, but I know it was definitely hours. By them never getting that piece, I was then left up with this thing that I didn't have and be exposed to the players. And how could I get it in their hands? Because it was not vital, but I thought it was really cool and could really help them in the story of the campaign. Reutilizing that is definitely something that you have to start thinking about, because as a GM or DM, you're going to create so much content that could very easily never see the light of day. So being able to think on the fly, how you can reincorporate things is super important. Instead of going to the tomb after their monster hunting, when they went to try to sell bits and parts of the monster, one of the techniques I used was the merchant that they went to try to get all this coin for slaying this wyvern. He wasn't really into it, but he had this bit of information that was super important, very expensive. And so he ended up doing almost a swap. But yeah, reutilizing elements that you've created. The same goes for miniatures. If you have that miniature that you painted and you expect them to go into the tombs and look at and experience, role play with, or battle, and they never go that direction, it can be a bummer. Don't let that get you down. Let's see, from David, I write down what I've improvised, then later you can use it again. Over time, I've built worlds that way. Absolutely, absolutely. Joshua says, if it's super important, I tend to let it fall into the hands of an enemy because they didn't go for it, so that they'll get it later. Lets them know what they missed. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, good notes are definitely important, and it just like with the flesh golem example, as you're working on something, if it doesn't quite go to plan, finding different ways to utilize that, whether it's in that campaign or a different one, or even in a different system, is fantastic. Game aids can be one of the most powerful ways to drive creativity. I always think Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, while I know that was a Star Frontiers kind of launch or tie-in, at the time I always thought, how cool would it be if some of that were to play out in a Star Trek game? Being able to cross genres and change things up on the fly is pretty cool. Let's see. Thank you, David. That flesh golem. It was a challenge because I had no intentions on doing anything with it, but I've got to clean off my shelf. Let's see. Kathleen says, I had an instance where the party wanted to avoid fighting a gelatinous cube. One of them tossed the key to the chest they needed, but the one catching failed their dex check. So I had the key fall into the cube. Great idea. Great idea. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, while there's a lot of confusion between railroading and, just directional play, in my opinion, unless you require or act out actions and reactions for your characters, railroading is a very challenging thing as a GM to do. You really have to hamstring your players to be railroading, but giving directional play, I think, is super important, especially as the narrator and generally the creator of the story skeleton, the bones of the story. Yeah, Barrier Peaks in Gamma World, definitely so, definitely so. Barrier Peaks is really what got me to change some of the way I approached D&D. Initially, for me, D&D was Conan or Excalibur, those sword and sorcery type genres. But when you think about a world where there's magic and dragons and things like that, it took a little bit more for me to open up my creative mind and know that there was more allowable than just sword and sorcery. Let's see. Barry says, I try to make each hook have its own allure, whether it's a tabletop asset or a lore piece, for the players to choose which they want to pursue. I'm the same way. The hooks they do not choose might still be there when they finish the one they chose. It may not. That's how I endeavor to show an ever-changing world. I do the same thing. Early on in the latest campaign I'm playing, they had a couple of choices that they could do as kind of early missions or quests. And when they came back, 2 of them were already done. They hired someone else to do it. Let's see. David says, if no player takes the lead and they are all just waiting and watching each other, you're forced to railroad them a bit to keep things moving. Agree 100%. I like the idea of strongly suggesting the course of action. It's not really railroading because they can still decide not to do it. Yes. So in my latest campaign, the same one where they had a couple of choices, it's kind of the same deal. Many of them are not taking that leadership role. And at that point, you have to do some railroading. And that's where I use some of the game aids that I've put in or built in, whether it's a map that an NPC kind of hands off. Oh, I thought you were the couriers. You're not? Well, the couriers are supposed to go here. Are you sure you're not? There are times where you have to do things like that to get things moving. And again, that's where some of the visual game aids come into play, because when you start presenting things like this, then they can start inspecting them. They'll get more invested in it. What is there? Why is that so important for there must be treasure there. And treasure is always a good driver for player action. Let's see. I feel as a GM, our indentation while describing options can subconsciously help the players make the decision you would like them to make. Yeah, so actually, Paul and I were talking a little bit about this. Let's see, where are we on time? We're okay for right now. We were talking about this. If you describe an environment fantastically. And you talk about this candle that is in a candelabra on the table, and it's this well-carved white candle with these elements on it. All of a sudden, the players are focused on this candle. We never meant to. It's just a really cool candle. But they focus on that. They focus on that candle. It's got to mean something. So utilizing what they attach to change and alter your game can be very beneficial too. Make sure you note that down. They love the candle, and then start thinking creatively. What does that candle? Maybe there is more to that candle. How can I utilize that to make their attention to the candle pay off in a big way? Let's see. Peter says, I've been in a habit of not wanting to paint my dragon figure. That way, when the players meet the gold, the green, the red, the copper, etc. color dragon, I can use the one dragon figure. Does that sound reasonable on a budget? Yes, 100%. 100%. I can tell you, dragons for me are one of my passions. I love painting dragons. You can't see it on my shelf now, but dragons for me are a love. And initially, my first dragon, I did not paint for a long time, so I could utilize that dragon for many different things. I didn't have this one. I actually have the red dragon. It's going through some basing right now because I finally did. I will tell you this. If you look at dragons, look at the bones dragons, because on average, you're going to find that the price of the bone dragons are very, very doable. Anytime you have an opportunity to do an exchange, if you jump on the forums, I can't stress this enough, and say that you would like to do an exchange and you're interested in dragons, you may not be able to swap a dwarf for a dragon, but there is plenty of people who, whether they have an extra dragon or they've painted a dragon specifically for an encounter and they're not going to use it again, you'll find opportunity for it. But until you get to that point where you have multiple dragons, don't hesitate to use an unpainted dragon. Additionally, what you can do too is, let's see, here's one from Joshua. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man rule. The things they fixate on will be the one to try and destroy them. Yep. So here's one from Paul. Months down the road, after a fun, memorable campaign chasing down the leads from the candle, you smile behind your DM screen, knowing it was all because you accidentally described a candle too well. Yes. So yeah, dragons are, for me, the same thing. Don't hesitate. Additionally, what you can do is, if you want to start painting that dragon, paint it one color, and don't hesitate to, I've done it all the time. It's not the exact mini, but it's close representation. Picture a copper dragon. Sometimes imagination has to play. It's an imaginary world. It's a fantasy world. Sometimes you have to get a little creative. Let's see, we're getting close on time. So any final big questions we have? Anyone use poker chips or tokens for various things in game? Absolutely. Want to know some of my secrets? Rings from pop, bottles, soda pop, bottles, or any type of container that I'm opening. If I'm putting oil in the car, if I'm opening a gallon of water, if I'm replacing a battery, they work great for different things. Spell effects for different colors, area of effects, something that you don't have a mini for, 100%. Sometimes you have to get creative. Creativity is what it's all about. All right, Peter says, good to know, since I didn't have any minis as a kid, but now that I'm running a game for kids, finally getting into buying and painting minis. All right, Peter, enjoy. I hope you have fun painting. That's the biggest thing. Enjoy it. Let's see. The mod says we can go over if we need to. Let's see how many questions we come up. Fate points, inspiration, etc. Always something coin-like. Yes, 100%, 100%. And especially if you go to, if there are casinos in your area and you go to it, a lot of times they'll have commemorative ones that you can purchase out of the coin shops or the gift shops and utilize things like that. Also look around at yard sales or even Goodwills, lots of opportunity to find little knickknacks you can use. Old mismatched chess sets from the thrift stores, dominoes, yes. Grids out of plexiglass, so I could write on one side and the lines are never affected. Anyone else use plexiglass? So I use plexiglass for some of my spell effects to just check ranges and everything. I found I've moved a little bit away from that just because of the bulk size of them, but that's a great idea. I'm browsing minis for one of my primary characters in my books, who is a key NPC in the game I now run. I haven't done any painting ever, so this is going to be interesting. Well, Kathleen, I would say two things to you as a piece of advice. Stay on the Reaper main Discord and take advantage of the community that's there. Every Sunday we have a painting club and lots of discussion, talk, tips, tricks, and just being able to see some of the people work is great. Matthew, no worries, enjoy your class. Also, Kathleen, for the second one, I would really say go to the Reaper mini forums. There is such a wealth of information, and I can't stress it enough. When I started my mini painting journey, that's really where I started, and I recommend it for everybody just starting to paint. All right, it looks like that's covered all the big questions. Unless anybody's got anything else, we'll go ahead and close it out, and really hope everybody enjoys the rest of the expo. Mark your calendars for September, ReaperCon coming down. Make sure you're participating on the Discord and to make sure you get into the forums. Any questions you have, don't hesitate, leave them on I have a discussion thread. If you're looking for a badge, the number 94717. Kathleen, perfect. We'll actually have, so I'm always trying to participate, but I'm going to be a vendor as well. So if you're interested in doing anything cooperatively as vendors, reach out. All right, Maud, thank you for popping that code in there. So if you need that badge, that is a green oak leaf. A green oak leaf. Make sure you wear your badge with honor, and hope the factions do really well showings. In the meantime, anything you need, give a yell. Look forward to talking to you on chat and in the forums. Thank you for joining, and I hope the experience has been fantastic if you're new, rewarding if you're experienced. Thank you much. All right, Maud, I'm going to go ahead and prep up to close down.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No, thank you. I enjoy and definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the class.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.
Don't work too hard.
Try not to.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.